The first two episodes of Alien Earth have just dropped, and honestly, I'm blown away by how immersive, gripping, exciting, and just bloody gory these first two installments were. Not only was this a great way of throwing us into the world, showing us three different species that clearly have division amongst them all, but we also saw so many moral questions being thrown our way on what defined a human in this world that was full of hybrids. With the Xenomorph's kill count being well in the double digits and it absolutely annihilating a room in seconds, let's dive into the first two episodes and break down all that there was to take away from it. Here is Alien Earth episodes 1 and 2 ending explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Joe. First off, I'm so glad to see Alex Lawther back in a hit show because I think he's such a great actor. So when he first appeared on screen, I thought it was a nice surprise. Most of the second episode was focused around Joe trying to escape from the Xeno in the 100 tower building as it was working its way down the levels and absolutely obliterating anybody that got in its way. What's clear to see with Joe is that he's mourning the life that he once had before all of this. The life that he had with his sister, who he believed was dead, but we knew was obviously Wendy, and also his father, who died in the previous year in January. This was shown to us through him talking to his father when he found the baseball, from him thinking back to comforting his sister, watching the likes of Ice Age, and also when he went to see if he could resign despite the fact that he had 7 months left on his contract. There's something about Joe that I think is particularly interesting, and the fact that he's specifically a medic in Prodigy. Out of most of the characters that we got the most screen time with in the first two episodes, Joe was the fully human character that dominated it the most, that was on the field, that wasn't the tech trillionaire Kavalier. There was a large focus on the morality of what defines a human and the likes of Wendy being told that she was no longer human, even though her mind had the memories of when she was one, but there was no flesh and bone that made up who she was. Being told that they weren't animals and that they shouldn't have fear and how they had no hormones, only programming that mimicked it. With Joe, in being the human character that got the most focus, with him also being a medic, somebody that was a giver of care, saving lives, and in its most basic form was crucial to the survival of the people. I think it showed just how important he was, and how even in a world that's full of the advanced species and races that are cyborgs and synths, the purest of forms still had a place, and realistically was the only one that felt real. Morrow was essentially just blinded by rage, Krish was as robotic as they come and emotionless as they could be, and the Lost Boys were children in adult bodies that couldn't be taken seriously due to the immaturity that they had. Seeing that hug that he gave Wendy right at the end of the episode when he realized that she was actually his sister, it was probably the most emotionally felt moment in the entirety of the two episodes. That and when he was watching the baseball game and thinking about his father. With him being tackled by the Xeno and it getting the prey that it spent the entirety of the episodes trying to get, if he survives that fall, which I'm presuming he will, Wendy will do all that she can to get him back. Wendy, Kavalier, and the Lost Boys. One of the first things that we were shown in this episode were the three different species that were present during the year 2120. There were the cybernetically enhanced humans, cyborgs, the AI beings which were the synths, and there were the synthetic beings downloaded with human brains known as hybrids. The hybrids was the boy genius Kavalier's latest invention, and he was taking children that were sick and essentially giving them a new lease of life by transferring their consciousness into a synthetic body. Kavalier called them the Lost Boys, and his island was called Neverland. Both of those names come from the story of Peter Pan, and the movie was even played as the children transferred over, and he was reading them the story at one point, so there's definitely a connection there. Kavalier promised that they'd be given eternal life, but it meant that they'd never be able to leave Neverland. This kind of ties into that wider theory about the Lost Boys in Peter Pan, and the fact that they were seen to be children that had died and their souls were trapped and were taken to Neverland, never able to leave. This is pretty much what Kavalier's doing, killing the children but transferring their minds, which are souls, into the bodies that he created, never allowing them to grow up or leave. What was particularly interesting to hear was that this technique didn't work in adults because their minds were seen to be too stiff, so they were destined to have a child's mind in a synthetic body for good. It could have been seen as a good thing that Kavalier was doing, however the promise to never leave takes away the fact that he's doing it out of the kindness of his own heart. He mentioned in a conversation with Dame Sylvia that he was doing this because he wanted to push humans to the point where they'll explode and essentially beat artificial intelligence at its own race. And in creating hybrid humans that will essentially never die, he's either transformed the human race or he's set it up for its own destruction. Dame Sylvia mentioned how she hoped that he hadn't just created immortal consumers and that it can be used for something good. But I think it definitely feels like there's a darkness and a superiority complex that will come with these hybrids. Wendy does feel like she's different to the others in the sense that she doesn't feel that fear that many of the others do, and despite the fact that it was said that they weren't supposed to feel emotions per se, she was pretty much disregarding orders so that she could save her brother. She even abandoned the mission right at the end of the episode so that she could go and rescue her brother again after being taken by the Xeno. In Peter Pan, Wendy is the more mature child out of them all, and she's viewed as the mother and the protector, and I feel like that's how Wendy's going to be portrayed in the show. She was also able to hear the Xenos inside of the eggs in a way that nobody else could, so I wonder if she's going to be able to communicate with them. What is Morrow's plan? During the opening scene of the first episode, we saw that Morrow awoke from cryosleep and the ship was in disarray. He was a cyborg that was on a ship of humans and there was a clear divide that was present between himself and the others, showing that he had no real sense of humor, wasn't part of the camaraderie, and was essentially driven to just get the mission done, which was to collect the specimens. When he awoke, we saw that he didn't let Zavari into the control room, and instead he focused on preserving himself and making sure that when the ship crashed into Earth, he was in a state where he was safe. When he landed on Earth, he captured a couple of Kavalier's soldiers and asked them where he was, making it seem like he was looking for him specifically. We know that the ship that he was on board belonged to Yutani, who is one of the 5 people to run the globe, and it got me questioning if this crash was actually something that was deliberately planned, especially for it to hit Kavalier's territory, almost like an act of terror. We saw that there was a slight feud between Kavalier and Yutani, and she mentioned how she wanted to send a team to retrieve the assets, but I wonder if the plan was for the assets to break free and ultimately rain terror on Kavalier's territory. This was so that he'd stand to be weaker after being impacted. We know that there were originally 4 large players that ran the globe, and then along came Kavalier a few years ago and entered as a 5th. So I feel there might be some sinister play going on here between the leaders. When the comms were down on the ship in the opening scene and the log files were disrupted, Morrow specifically stopped the team from looking into it. So I definitely feel like he was given a secret mission by Yutani, so I imagine that'll likely be revealed as the season develops. My review of the episode. Before coming into this show, there were a ton of reviews going on about how good it was, and that's something that I can be a little bit skeptical about sometimes because it makes me fear that it won't live up to it. However, these first 2 episodes were simply incredible. From a visual perspective, from an immersive perspective, from a storytelling perspective, and from a performance perspective. They just hit the nail on the head and provided 2 episodes of television that I just didn't want to finish. I love the whole complex that's going to occur around what makes something human, especially if they're one of the 3 species that are racing for immortality. One thing that always amazes me with Alien is that after all of these years, they're still able to capture the tone of what made the original movie so great and bring it to life several decades later. One of the strongest things about these first 2 episodes for me was just how gory it was. We didn't see it right up close or in the moment with just how vicious the Xeno could be, but it was more the aftermath of it. It was just absolutely horrific, and the carcasses that would be left, even that guy just crawling away with half of his body, was just absolutely brutal. When it comes to the performances, I don't think I can fault any of them. Kavalier is this arrogant jerk that's fully aware of just how intelligent and powerful he is, saying how he's basically elevating human potential so he can have a meaningful conversation with somebody genuinely summed up his attitude. That, and also when he was sitting there with his dirty feet on the table. He's a really dislikable but interesting character that I want to see more of. Wendy as well is also such an interesting character. It seems like Kavalier has created her and she's going to far exceed his potential and could ultimately end up bringing about his demise. The fact that she can also hear xenomorphs in their eggs, I wonder if she's going to be able to hear that, learn, and then be able to communicate with them. She's a great character, and despite no longer being human and not being seen as one by those around her, she's probably the character that exhibits the most human traits in the show. One other scene that I absolutely loved was the disaster that happened with the ship crashing into the tower, and when Joe first got off and saw the damage up close. The slow motion and silence that we were thrown into, which showed just how shocked he was something that I really felt in that moment. It suited it perfectly and got across just how much damage had been done. Overall, the first 2 episodes did a really great job at introducing us to this world, a world that had this tense atmosphere at the heart of it, and I can't wait to pick back up with it next week. So, there you have it, Alien Earth episodes 1 and 2 ending explained.